about is, what does this mean for Ukraine and their side of things in terms of the spring offensive? Because if you have got Russia in this very weak and divided, distracted state at the moment, is this the time for sort of Ukraine to pounce and surge forward?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt it's good news for Ukraine. The issue is whether or not the counteroffensive, which started probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, but has only been, I think, in reality, probing attacks, trying to find weaknesses in the Russian front line. They've had a lot of time to prepare their defenses. We know that, and we haven't yet seen any, major breakthrough. But the issue will be, I think, what has always been the issue in this campaign. Actually, it's and I've talked about it on the show before with others. It is what we call the moral component of fighting power. This is not just about weapons and stuff and about how to use that stuff well and so forth. Ultimately, at the heart of any army's fighting power is what we, the British Army, call the moral component. It's the will to fight and the preparedness to die on the battlefield in order to bring about success, however one views that success. And Ukraine has displayed huge moral component in the last year and a half in their defensive operations. And they will need to maintain that in these offensive operations. But the flip side of the coin is that the Russians have a very low moral component. And all this will do, all of this division between Putin and the Wagner Group and so forth, will be to undermine that moral component even further. So maintaining the pressure on this Ukrainian offensive, hopefully, this will be disrupting the Russian chain of command. I mean, Russian generals who are based in Ukraine trying to carry on this fight are going to be looking over their shoulders, wondering what on earth's going to happen next.
Absolutely. And it's such an important point you make about that moral component. It's a really interesting phrase, that sort of spirit. And in terms of, the Ukrainians will probably have even higher a moral component now looking at this. Is this the time for the West to step up support for Ukraine in any way? What should other kind of allied countries be doing at this point? Because it feels like this is quite a critical juncture.
Yes, we won't know the reality of how critical it is, obviously, for some time. I mean, this has been coming for quite a while, this division between Putin, the senior Russian generals and their MOD, and the Wagner Group. There's been these tensions for quite a long time. I mean, at one stage, people thought this was a sort of disinformation campaign designed to confuse and deflect, from the fight, if you like. But there's no doubt that this is a major turning point. The Wagner Group are very important to Putin and Russia. They're not huge in terms of numbers, but they have been the ones who've done quite a lot of the fighting and quite a lot of the dying in places like Bakhmut and elsewhere. So the West has been, I don't want to be too clever about this, but reasonably good at supporting Ukraine thus far. The problem is what we need probably is a rapid reinforcement of Ukraine with the weapon systems that they need to conduct this counteroffensive. And you can't do that quickly. The West has had quite a long time to deliver, these armored vehicles, all the conversations about F-16 to try and sustain or maintain or achieve air supremacy, or at least air superiority. All of that, we've had a lot of time to enable that to happen. It hasn't happened thus far in the numbers and the scale that I think it is necessary for Ukraine to really make a serious breakthrough, assuming that the Russian forces don't collapse. I mean, that's a possibility. I doubt it to be true. I think the other thing we need to know is that, brutal dictatorships do collapse quite quickly sometimes. The problem is, and you were referring to this just before I came onto the program, the problem is what comes next, internally as well as externally. But in the context of your question, the West, yes, does need to ramp up support, certainly needs to provide more equipment as quickly as possible. And frankly, I think quicker than it has been doing in the last few weeks.
There's no suggestion that while Putin is sort of weakened in this moment, that the West goes further than they've been doing and sort of boots on the ground or a bit more. You're not suggesting that in any way.
No, I'm not. And I understand why some people would argue that, but I'm not in favor of that. I mean, Russia is how we deal with Russia. What this looks like at the end of the day is not easy to see, but I don't think it would be helpful for NATO to put NATO forces on the ground in the airspace of this regional conflict, which is what it is.
Okay.
What we need to look for is we need this civil war, which is what it may be, to develop. and we then need to see Russia pushed out of Ukraine before we then move back to what we were talking about prior, only a week ago, was when Ukraine would become a NATO partner and all of those other things that could flow from that.